Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Sam Koslowski.
I'm Billi FitzSimons. Last week, late-term abortions came up as a point of contention in Australia's parliament. It's all because of a new proposed bill that would make it illegal for companies to cancel paid parental leave if a baby dies or is born stillborn. So what's the connection between that and late-term abortions? And how common actually are late-term abortions? We'll tell you what you need to know in today's podcast.
Billi, when you pitched this story, I was confused because abortions don't usually come up as a point of debate in the federal parliament here in Australia. It feels like a very American conversation to be having.
It does. And the reason why it doesn't usually come up in Australia's federal parliament, well, there are two reasons. The first one is that abortion is not dealt with at a national level in Australia. It's a state and territory issue.
Right.
So each state government is responsible for creating and enforcing their own abortion law, which actually is also the case in the US, but it's very, very different.
Sure.
Because the second reason is that abortion, unlike in America, is now decriminalised in all states and territories in Australia. So it's not something that is still debated very often either in federal parliament or in any parliament in Australia.
So give me a sense then, we have this uniform approach now in Australia across those different jurisdictions. Why has this topic come up now?
Just to clarify, there are still some differences between the state and governments, but
at a baseline, there's a decriminalisation.
Yes, definitely. The reason it's come up now is because of a bill that Labor, so the government, has introduced in federal parliament. But that bill, on the face of it, doesn't actually have anything to do with abortion.
And so what should I be thinking about with this bill in terms of the subject area?
So it's about paid parental leave. So last month, the federal government introduced a bill to make it illegal for companies to cancel paid parental leave if a baby is stillborn or dies in infancy. It is called Baby Priya's Bill, and it was named after a baby called Priya who died at 6 weeks old, and her mother's paid parental leave was cancelled by her employer. So it was off the back of her experience that the government heard about it and implemented this bill, which is yet to become law, but is currently being debated in Parliament, which is why we're talking about it. Now, just to give you a little bit more context, currently, government-funded paid parental leave is not cancelled if a baby dies, but employer-funded paid parental leave can be.
Give me a sense of how the general Australian paid parental leave scheme works, because I think it's important to understand what are the current rules in order to understand where a potential reform would fit.
Yeah, so employees can get paid parental leave payments from both their employer and the government after a birth or adoption, and you can get both at the same time. So the government one gives parents 24 weeks of minimum wage payments. Parents do need to complete an income test to prove their eligibility for that one because it is capped at a certain salary.
Right.
And then separate to that, employers can also give their employees paid parental leave.
On top of that.
On top of that, which can vary depending on companies' policies and contracts. But that's more to maintain the salary that you're at. The government one is minimum wage. Now, what this law is doing that we're talking about today, it is making it illegal for companies to cancel their agreed upon paid parental leave if the employee's baby is born stillborn or dies.
And so this bill, Baby Priya's bill, you said that that's a government bill before, so we know that Labor is supporting it because they're the ones proposing it. Give me a sense then of the coalition's position.
Well, when TDA reached out to the opposition when the bill was first introduced, the opposition confirmed that they were in favour of it. So Shadow Employment Minister Tim Wilson told TDA, quote, "When families experience the devastating loss of an infant, clocking into work should be the last thing on their mind." He continued, "This is an important step to ensure compassion and dignity are afforded to grieving parents."
So when approximately was this statement given to us?
About less than a month ago, but a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And it's true still today that the opposition broadly is in support of this bill. But there's a few politicians who have brought up concerns about what they call possible unintended consequences of this bill. And this is where abortion comes in.
Okay, so the unintended consequences now is this space that we're going to talk about.
Yes.
It's not necessarily, I assume, a lack of sympathy for the extremely traumatic event, but
No.
another kind of angle to this.
Yeah, and so specifically this is about late-term abortions. Now, just to give you some context, there's not one exact definition of when an abortion is considered late-term, but broadly speaking, it's abortions after the 20th week of pregnancy. So in relation to this bill, a few politicians, part of the coalition, including former Nationals leader Barnaby Joyce and also Liberal MP Andrew Hastie, who we recently spoke about because it was speculated that he possibly wanted to take the leadership of the Liberal Party from Susan Lee. He has since stepped down from the front bench, but that's a whole other story. But it's him and Barnaby Joyce who have kind of led this, or are definitely the most high-profile coalition politicians who are speaking out against this. They have said that they are concerned that this bill could apply to those who have late-term abortions, which they argue should not happen.
Let's get really specific, though, about what exactly they said here.
Yeah, well, we can be so specific that I can even play you a little bit.
Let's let them speak.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a little bit of what Barnaby Joyce said in Parliament.
I stand on the position that the day after a child is born, no matter what medical conditions or impairments that might be there, you have no right to interfere in their life. And therefore, the day before, we believe it's the same. That is something that I hope I've lived by, and I think it's incredibly important for me to state my position on this. There must be a clarification on this issue. It must be clarified before we come to a vote.
He went on to say that he supports the bill, but he just doesn't support it if this one thing is not clarified.
Right.
And I just want to reiterate, they are not debating whether or not late-term abortions should be legal or not. Again, that's not a thing for federal parliament to decide. They are debating whether this specific law should apply to those who have late-term abortions. Although I say they are debating it, it's not really a debate because it's not actually, as we'll get into, part of this bill.
I want to pick up that point because that's a really interesting one. But before we get there, I think a really important duty of the news in dealing with stories like this is to actually ground ourselves in the numbers. So can you give me a sense of how actually common are late-term abortions?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that late-term abortions are not legal in most parts of Australia, pretty much all parts of Australia, unless it is in rare circumstances that call for it, such as fetal abnormality or if the mother's life is deemed to be at risk. And typically you'll need approval from 2 doctors. So that's the case in all states and territories except the ACT, where there is no gestational limit. But again, late-term abortions remain very, very rare there, and it is still in only very rare circumstances that it happens.
Statistically insignificant.
Yes, and I think why that's worth clarifying as well is because it's not accurate to say that a woman in Australia can get an abortion the day before she's due to give birth. That is not legal. In terms of how common late-term abortions are, again, remembering we're talking about post 20 weeks of pregnancy, I couldn't find an exact number for how many nationally occur. It's quite complicated because it is dealt with states and territories. But to give you an example, in South Australia, they say the proportion of terminations that happen after 20 weeks is less than 3%.
Okay, so the argument being mounted or entertained by Barnaby Joyce is that there is a group that is, falling into this category because of a late-term abortion. We now understand that that's a very small group of people. What has Andrew Hastie said on this then?
He's basically said the same thing. He said that he agrees with the intention of this bill, but he does not support it being used for any person who has a late-term abortion. And so he has asked the government to clarify if this applies to late-term abortions.
And has the government done that?
They have, although they've basically said there's no clarification needed because they argue the bill is very clear in talking about stillbirths, which it points out is very different to abortions. So the Health Minister, Mark Butler, said on ABC, the definitions here are very clear. A stillbirth is the loss of a fetus or a baby through a natural spontaneous event. He added, the men who are doing this, and they are all men, know the difference between stillbirth and abortion.
So what he's saying there, hearing very clearly in the way that you're reporting that quote as well, is that it is only men from the coalition who have spoken about this. Are there any female members of the coalition that have had anything to say publicly whilst this debate has been kind of heating up?
Yeah, female MPs in the coalition have spoken about this, but from what I could see, none of them were saying anything in line with what Barnaby Joyce and Andrew Hastie are saying. They are all in support of it. So Shadow Health Minister Anne Ruston has spoken specifically about the quotes that Barnaby Joyce and Andrew Hastie have given, and she said that the coalition is in support of it. She told The Guardian, "I think this bill is about something completely different, and I'm very focused on making sure that we keep our bipartisan commitment to Priya's mother."
Okay, so Billi, final question from me on this. Do you have any sense of what's next for this bill? And also, I'd love to get your take on whether you think this will pass and become law.
I think this will pass because we have heard from both sides that they are in support of the underlying intention of this bill. They've just asked for clarification on one thing, and the government has now provided that clarification. So
Right.
I do believe that it will pass. In terms of when it will pass, there is a sitting week this week, but it might not pass this week. There might still be more debate, but I'm confident that it will eventually pass, because when your starting point is bipartisan support, I think that's a pretty good indication.
It is a stunning comparison in the two different political systems of what we're seeing and the conversation we've had today, and a US discussion which is notoriously polarizing and takes decades to move through for the US population. Billi, thank you so much for taking us through that.
Thank you.
And that's all we've got time for on this morning's episode of The Daily Aus. Thank you so much for joining us for another week of news from your favourite newsroom. We're going to be back in the afternoon with some headlines. Until then, have a great day.
Bye.